The creature's black, empty eyes stare straight through you as it drags its grossly elongated limbs across the wooden floor, moving closer to you, its mouth agape as it takes ragged, raspy breaths. The creature is right on top of you as it seems to unhinge.
I'm sorry, I feel really uncomfortable. Can we not do this anymore?
So I'm guessing you don't want to have this happen during your horror campaign, right?
That's why, when it comes to running a horror game, whether it be a creepy one-shot or a full-length horror campaign, using these spooky safety tools, you'll make sure everyone has a good time and enjoys the right amount of thrills and chills. So here's how to safely run a horror D&D campaign. Let's get into it. Run a Session 0. I know, it seems pretty obvious, but Session 0 is so important in any D&D campaign, but especially a horror D&D game. In horror, the goal is to push boundaries and make people feel uncomfortable, so that's why running a spooky Session 0 is incredibly important. So in your Session 0, make sure to ask your players how far they're willing to go on gore, body horror, psychological horror, and anything else that might come up in your campaign.
How do you spell decapitation?
I'm just gonna draw no head. If you've played any kind of role-playing game, you've heard of lines and veils, and it is so important to go over this in a horror campaign. But if you don't know lines and veils, the lines are hard no's, things that you cannot have in the campaign. They are the hard boundaries that cannot be pushed. The veils are things that maybe you're semi-comfortable with. For example, if one of your veils is blood, maybe you're okay with a description of like there's a metallic scent in the air, a dripping sound, but you don't want any explicit, there's blood splattered on the floor, and you don't want any of that, but you're okay with implied blood and implied gore. You don't want your players to feel like they're watching a horror movie that they didn't want to watch in the first place. It just makes everyone uncomfortable, and your players will just think you have bad movie taste, so no one wants that. Once you've established your boundaries, it's time to move on to consent tools.
Oh wait, I forgot his nose.
In tabletop role-playing games, a lot of the times people use the X card. I gave the usual X card a little bit of a spooky twist instead of the regular just X card. You know, make it spooky, make it themed. That's why you're doing a horror campaign. You want a theme. I was saying something. I gotta read my script. I forgot what I was saying. So if during the game anything crosses a line or a player just feels uncomfortable, they can use the X card. They can hold it up or they can touch the X card, and that lets the DM know that whatever's happening, they want to either skip it or let's just gloss over it and move on to something else. It makes these social situations of the game a little bit easier for people who might have a hard time speaking up and saying that they're uncomfortable. And to round all this out, try making a consent form. Something that goes over the lines and veils, the X card, and any other spaces where players can explicitly say what they do not want in the campaign. This consent form can also include a wide variety of horror tropes that are normally seen in horror movies, games, campaigns, that any player or even the DM might not want to see in the game. I actually made my own little consent form, so if you don't want to make one yourself, I have a digital form that you can just purchase if you want to help make your horror campaign a little bit easier and a little bit more spooky safe. And don't forget, at the end of your campaign, go over the stars and wishes, things that the players loved or things that they wish they could have seen. And if you want to make it spooky and Halloween themed, it could be treats and tricks, things that they loved, treats, and things that they want to see more of. Tricks. I'm not saying I'm a genius, but I love a good theme. Alright, let's talk about the elephant in the room of any horror campaign, game, or movie. Gore. Ghoul? Huh? Okay. Gore is a powerful tool that has been used in many horror films, games, and just anything in the horror genre. And it's used for a reason. It does things to the mind and body that just make us feel uncomfortable, to be honest. In Session 0 and your consent form, you should go over the levels of gore that your players players are comfortable with. Are they okay with explicit descriptions of incredibly gory scenes? Or is it more implied gore, fade to black type things? I once had a player in one of my campaigns who gets really nauseous and faints at any signs of gore. But my other players really like gore. But just because a majority of your other players are okay with something doesn't mean that you should add it in the campaign. The comfort level needs to be the same for everyone. It doesn't matter if a majority of your players are fully okay with gore. If one player isn't, then hey, just don't add it. But if your players are comfortable with gore, here's how to do it. When you use gore, make sure it serves a purpose. Try to make sure it's part of the narrative instead of just for shock value. It's great the first couple of times, but it gets old pretty fast. A slow build, feeling the tension, and then gore is a perfect payoff in a gory, spooky campaign. If you use it all the time, it feels a little bit cheap, and it loses its oomph, you know? And if you want to incorporate different levels of gore, try implied gore. You see dark stains on the floor, you smell this metallic scent in the air. And then the payoff for explicit gore, if you want to have that in your campaign, is much bigger. I think I'm gonna move on. I've talked about gore a lot. And moving into my next point, if your players look uncomfortable, pull back. I don't know why this image came to mind. So one of the hardest parts while being a dungeon master in a horror campaign is trying to find the perfect balance between spooky fun and going too far. It is so important to take stock, to actually look at your players and see how they're doing. One of the most important roles as a DM is to read the room. If one of your players looks physically uncomfortable, pause, take stock, and ask everyone how they're doing and how they're doing with the subject matter. Or if one of your players looks disengaged or isn't participating, that could be a sign that a player is shutting down because they're really uncomfortable and aren't confident enough to actually say something. So just be aware and make sure to pay attention. Don't be a bad DM and push boundaries and not think about your players. Let's talk about psychological horror, the brain scaries. Personally, I love psychological horror. I think it is just so much fun to just unsettle your players in very subtle ways. And that is what psychological horror is all about. But with psychological horror, since it's brain stuff, you need to be careful. The key to psychological horror is description. Describing things that maybe are slightly off. I've been getting into Call of Cthulhu, which I'm kicking myself for not getting into Call of Cthulhu earlier because holy crap, it is my kind of game. I just haven't had anyone to play with, but it's fine. I'm playing by myself because you can do that, technically. Anyways, where was I? Psychological horror. So what's great about Call of Cthulhu and other specifically horror tabletop role-playing games is sometimes the props. Finding a journal while the players are investigating someone and the journal entries seem to be getting more and more frantic. Maybe your players are in a forest and they find like a missing persons poster, but the missing persons poster slightly off, scratched out, faded, and it's like running, you know. Scary, spooky things like that, just to give it a little bit more atmosphere. Sometimes the little things are scarier than big jump scares and gore. Okay, well, this is the scariest thing that I've drawn and talked about today. Anyways, but after you've scared your players, it's a good idea to have a cooldown. Basically, get out of the horror after you've been in it for so long. That can either be in-game by having a little bit of a happily ever after moment, or it can be out of game where you turn the lights back on, do something else, have something not scary, so that you and your players all leave feeling good and the right amount of spooked. It's also great to reflect and talk about the game so that your players can let you know what you did well and what they'd like next time, or if they don't want to do it again, because sometimes you can think you want something and then you really don't. Just make sure to leave on a positive note so that nobody goes home with nightmares in the bad way. You want them to go home with nightmares in a good way. Anyways, running a horror game can be so rewarding and so much fun, but it's also important to be mindful and make sure everyone at the table is having fun. Just make sure to use these safety tools, respect boundaries, and be adaptable as a DM. So go forth and scare the pants off of your players. In a good way. Well, I think I'm gonna leave it here for now. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to give me a like and subscribe, and tell me if you liked the video and you found this helpful. I'd love to hear your feedback and what tools you use when you run a horror campaign. I actually made my own little consent form, so if you don't want to make one yourself, I have a digital form that you can just purchase if you want to. And if you would like to support me in the channel, think about signing up for my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And if you want to hear some real horror stories from bad DMs and problem players, check out my Patreon as well. I post a not safe for YouTube RPG horror story video a month on there, so go check that out if you're interested. And speaking of patrons, I would like to thank my Tavern Wanderer patrons, Brynew64 and Kent Welter. Thank you so much. And thank you, my new Tavern Adventurer patron, Wolfman3578. Thank you so much, I appreciate you. Thank you. And I would like to give a very special thank you to all my Tavern Legend patrons. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shivan Moodley. I appreciate you. Thank you, Dean Thomas. I appreciate you as well. Thank you, Mike Dean. I appreciate you as well. Thank you, Nick Burton. I appreciate you, thank you. And thank you, TJ Datch. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for becoming Tavern Legend patrons. And if you would like to sign up for my Patreon, check out the links below, as well as the links to all my other social medias down there. Well, that's all for now. I will see you in the next one.